Thanks and good morning. My interpretation of rapporteur means is it's the person who gives the executive summary of what happened yesterday to those who are either asleep or were playing with their iPads, or sometimes both. It was also one of the ways that I had to restrain having too many drinks last night, so I'm sure it's been very good for my metabolism as well. Well, Larry said yesterday that this is not your ordinary housing conference, and I really remember his inspirational story yesterday. And as a former banker, I mean, however exciting spreadsheets and numbers can get, it's actually the stories about people, members of staff, as well as our tenants that we need to hear. Now, as a very serious researcher in the housing field, of course I would love to go on for the next 15 minutes about housing policy, but instead I thought I'd give you some memorable snippets from yesterday, because there were many of them. I was quite struck by the cavalcade of doctors that we had in the room yesterday. Dr. Tim, Owen, Viv, Stephen, Clive, Ian, Tony. Basically, it's going to be PhD entry only in social housing in the future, so go out there and get studying. So if there's any medical emergency, if any organisations need resuscitating, the doctors of social housing will be there to assist. Now, we of course enjoyed our minister's debut on YouTube. It's very interesting. I wasn't too sure whether it was like Big Brother speaking, or potentially with the change of name to Life of Brian. Clearly with the turnover of housing ministers, they actually have to make a little kind of video recording on day one, just in case that's their legacy. But it's a generation-wide approach to housing policy, which is good. I thought the role play worked remarkably well. And I think actually there's some potential career changes that could happen there. I mean, there are some countries with social housing systems where you do actually cross the great divide and go to the other side, both ways, in fact. My stepmother did that shift, but she went the right way, she came to our side. But I think Mike Allen, with his Mercedes we hear he's going to be driving, would actually make a very good head of an avaricious community housing organisation on the move for mergers. But Ken Marchingo, I can see him running a state housing authority. We'd have some down-to-earth talk there, so easy swap between those two. I like the idea of the tenants' revolt as well. So whereas the Brits had defend council housing run by a lot of earnest Marxists who lived in private dwellings, we had from Australia, just bloody talk to us. That's the name of our movement here. So that could be led by Jan from the centre. I thought Owen made a very good minister. He was very ministerial yesterday. And he referred, of course, to our neo-Russian system of social housing. Well, I think the Russian system is far more participative than our public housing system. And of course we had Dr. Tim yesterday, who was quite interesting in his construction of the names of our panel members, with Jane Berryman and Tony Innes featuring. I'm glad to see that the Tonys are spreading, and he's kind of rebranding everyone in the sector Tonys, so it's very easy to know everyone's name at a cocktail party. Now, speaking of names, of course, Dr. Tim is known as something of a name dropper. He had actually just had lunch the previous week with Paul Keating, and I'm sure he's had breakfast with Julia Gillard on his way here. And he has actually been advisor to every minister in Britain since William Gladstone. So it's good to have him in our sector here, as keeping us informed of what was happening then. And Ken pictured quite clearly the mythology of community housing. And this, of course, was why I joined. It was the cardigans, the floral huts, and the kumbayarn. And as somebody said, these are the smugly small and complacent organisations. I take it they're referring to organisations who are not members of PowerHousing there. But that's okay. In the dress sense, PowerHousing now has jackets for sale. So if any of you are not smart enough, you can buy jackets. But we do have a sexist pricing policy. So we're not too much into equality. Well, we had some fun in the breakout rooms. The Canberra suite upstairs I pictured as being a bordello. A rather strange set of furnishings there. But downstairs, In the Tasmanian area, that was definitely the dungeon. A distinct S&M flavour to the light fittings. I wouldn't stay too late in those rooms, anything could happen. And as Geraldine memorably said on her journey in Bradford, she described it as the road to hell. She may well know that as the M62, but she certainly had some interesting times to tell us about that. And in the breakout session on governance as well, I learned a very new term, which I'm going to try and sneak into my latest academic article, which is called the muesli board. So what do you have with these problems with directors? You have fruits, flakes and nuts. That's going to be one of my terms of 2012. And we were also told that with directors, it's like herding cats. But we were told you just have to move the food. We'll be following that in the layout of the future PowerHousing conferences. Now, the last gig in the afternoon yesterday was not one that perhaps some of us expected to be too exciting. Policy settings in social housing is not normally the way to inspire the troops. But Vivian Milligan, who had the unfortunate job of supervising my doctoral research, memorably described housing policy as a row of ducks. So I should keep picturing those ducks and kind of trying to fire at some of them. It was interesting that Sean Innes had come along, Tony Innes had come along with his $10 billion checkbook. I hadn't realised that was the value of his funding. However, I understand that he's now spent most of the $10 billion, so I don't think he'll be bringing out his checkbook too much longer on those types of activities. But what also struck me is I'm someone who spent 20 years in banking and tried to escape. But I'd actually go into a socially meaningful sector where we can actually care about people and communities. So you end up coming to a conference and all you speak about now is the complexities of bond issuance and the AAA rating that we're now going to be getting in our sector. So it's a small world, isn't it? Finance meets housing. So I'll give you a couple of takeaway messages of the content of yesterday, maybe. The first one is on stock transfer. Now, whoever thought that stock transfer would become the new black? A few years ago in housing conferences, we weren't talking about stock transfer. It just wasn't on the radar. But why are we talking about it now? Was this a topic that we would actually have chosen to be top of our agenda? Well, maybe there's not much else on offer at the moment in terms of housing government. And as Ian Winter said, we're in the gritty reality of 2012. Perhaps that's what we have to go for instead, is the stock transfer. John Nicolaides memorably mentioned that in his housing organisation, the word stock has been banned. I presume there's instant dismission if you mention stock, which could be a bit confusing if you're kind of cooking a meal in the evening and using some stock. Fired! But it's all about properties, not stock, because stock is like a commodity. But here in New South Wales and even down in Tassie, where they try to do the same as well, we don't even bother with transferring anything, really. We just kind of give a lease, a very short lease, 3 years, ministerial cycle. Well, that's probably a bit longer than a ministerial cycle. 2 years if you're in Tassie, because Tassie is Tassie. So I'm not too sure what's transferring across at all. But what I would say is, it's not really what happened in Britain. So beware words, they actually mean something different. We had an interesting presentation as to what was happening in Bradford yesterday. And that was a pretty meaty transfer of 18,000 properties, John, and everything else as well. Forests, actually I didn't know there were too many forests in Bradford, but the Bradford forests were transferred across, common land was transferred across, offices were transferred across, people. It was something more than we do, which we do sort of a temporary lease for a few years on a kind of outsourcing tenancy management. Maybe what we've got here now is arm's length management, ALMOs rather than stock transfer, and that's only interesting if it leads to something else, in my view. We also heard about the Decent Home Standard. I've come across the Decent Home Standard. It was basically known as the gold tap standard among some people. It was kitchens and bathrooms. And that's what Bridge Housing have been doing in some of their properties as well. But it had a very particular place in Britain, because the Brits, surprisingly, actually allowed democracy to take place for these stock transfers. And this meant that you had to bid with goodies. It's a bit like pets win prizes. Give goodies and you will get the transfer to take place. Here we can maybe write a cheque for $200 and promise some bathroom improvements. But it was a way of convincing people to switch across. And the cynics may say that's what it was about. Was it really about bringing properties up to decent home standards? Because a lot of people I've spoken to in Britain did not reckon that the standards they brought the houses up to were all that great. And therefore, everybody had their own standards. So people criticised decent home standards for being bog standard. And that wasn't to do with the bathroom fittings, by the way. So they had higher standards. There was the Bradford standard. There was the bridge housing standard we've got over here now. So everyone is trying to bring up to standard, but to what standard and who sets that level? And do we set it high or do we set it low? Because I'm kind of thinking that this stock transfer is a bit like our beloved state governments outsourcing a major issue, which is bringing up to date a lot of the housing stock that was built 40 and 50 years ago. So outsourcing problems is a bit different to let's get all those great properties coming over. And as Mike Allen suggested, I'm not too sure whether this was role play or experience. You know, do we get the crap? Is it crap property transfer we get, or is it decent properties? Well, I think I know what I'd be doing if I was an estate housing authority, so check very carefully. I mean, you could check their records, but apparently the records aren't really well up to date, so you have to do your own trial. Or as I did on one of the stock transfers I was working on, cycled around the estate to see what was actually there. In New South Wales, the policy seems to be find the most remote located social housing that's the most difficult and complicated to administer, and then give it to an association that's maybe quite a distance away. So, again, that's outsourcing the travel to the community housing sector. And also, we haven't really addressed two rather important components of social housing stock transfer, and that's the tenants and the staff. So we haven't addressed the property, because that's largely staying with the state, and we've forgotten about the tenants and the staff. This is not really housing policy, is it? It's kind of making it up on the back of an envelope. And I see a bit of a role for PowerHousing Australia in crystallising what this policy should be. We are apparently now going to become policy makers, not policy takers. And that's not because there's a huge amount of housing policy around, it's because we've got to fill the gaps as we go along. Now the final session yesterday was looking at the future. Beware futurologists, they always get it wrong, but you always get some great stories about what gadgets and gizmos are going to be coming along. And I saw three different pathways going forward. The first one was the doom and gloom. I don't know, I was getting sort of a bit suicidal towards the end of this presentation. You know, we had to fix world peace, the Middle East, we had to get the states and Commonwealth working together, we had to change the style, fashion of community housing providers, we had to do planning, land reform, finance, you name it. Our task was bigger than Ben-Hur, with a smaller budget, and probably fewer well-known actors. The second approach, I thought, was the big idea. It used to be the silver bullet, but I think that was thought as being a little bit violent. And for some reason here, our big ideas always tend to be with finance. Finance is the white knight. The investment bankers are going to go and leave Macquarie and wherever else they've worked and charge in on their steeds to rescue our sector and to give us what we need. And the latest big idea is bonds. Very, very interesting. We're all going to be slice, dice, mezzanine finance, AAA rated. And I can admit, as a former worker in that sector, I was pretty confused by what was going on there as well. But from what I could see, the government was going to spend $90 million a year and was going to leverage $7 billion. Now, I'm going to look at the details when the Uhuru report comes out. This is going to be hot off the press, Uhuru literature. But $7 billion from 90 million sounds interesting if we can get that to work. Sounds a bit like the lotto. Perhaps we actually spend 90 million on lotto tickets and then but I liked Owen Donald's approach, whose one big idea is that one big idea sucks. I perhaps favour that one as well. And then I'd say the final approach was several small ideas rather than one big idea. It's kind of go local, go small, build the sector step by step. And we've got the Australians for Affordable Housing doing a great job with the checks that are coming out from various support organisations. And after years of campaigning, we're going to get to number 5 on the list. It's interesting that it takes so much to get so low on the list of the nation's priorities. I don't know where we're on the list, we're obviously lower down than number 5. But maybe some other ideas like South Australia, where they seem to be getting their act together in terms of a redevelopment agency and sorting out some of the social housing. If those ideas can be spread, inclusionary zoning can be spread, from little things, big things might grow. But I characterise these 3 approaches to what the future is as based on different nations, really. The doom and gloom is clearly the British approach. We don't know what to do, so we'll whinge about it. The American idea is the big idea. Tax will go in, we'll sort things out with our big answer, and Wall Street will be helping us. So I kind of favour the several small ideas approach, which I think is the Australian approach. It's like, okay mate, get on with it together. Let's actually start those small initiatives off. You know, we're a small set of organisations. PowerHousing is not magnificently endowed with the legacy of some similar organisations overseas. And I think it is from those small ideas that big things will grow. So if I'm looking to the future, I've got Australia. Thank you.